According to the information delivered by Suzuki, the enemy's air power on Oahu Island amounted to 500 planes in total. Our aim was to force them out of action on the ground to prevent them from taking off to launch a preemptive assault against our planes. The information provided by Suzuki was most timely and helped us with our operational planning. That day, Hitokapu Bay became stormy. After the meeting was completed, the flight officers tried to return to their mother ships, but it was not possible to prepare any boats for their return. I went to the upper deck to see them off, and found the weather had turned ghastly. The accommodation ladder had already been lifted up, and angry waves were blowing spray up to the deck. I told the Kaga's head of aviation, Lieutenant Commander Takashi Hashiguchi, "It's not possible to get back. You should stay here on the Akagi tonight." Hashiguchi said, "Well, if you say so. The fierce storm here in the North Sea is beyond imagination. At this rate, I don't know what it's going to be like in turbulent waters every day." Then the commander of the Akagi's fighter squadron, Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya, came up to me and began talking. "General Commander, we cannot launch any boats because of the storm, and it has been decided that all flight officers will stay on the Akagi tonight. So we are going to have a kick-off party from now, and your presence will honor us greatly. The party will be held in the officers' mess." I responded, "That's a good idea," and went down to the officers' mess accompanied by Hashiguchi. The next day, November 24th, the weather improved. On each aircraft carrier, the commander of each squadron explained the details to his crew members of what had been discussed at the flight officers' meeting the previous day. Then the crew members of each carrier's air squadrons came to the flagship Akagi. It was to have them see the miniature of Oahu Island. I asked that the miniature model of Oahu Island that had been kept in secret in the staff officers' room be brought to the flight deck. Pointing with a whip, I explained to those crew members, who came one by one, their duties and action guidelines for the upcoming operations. The miniature was extremely well made, and they all seemed to understand my explanation of what to expect as they remembered their practice drills at Kagoshima Bay. Later, on the day of the attack, one of the crew members who returned from the air raid told me, "General Commander, Oahu Island was exactly like the miniature." Then we burst into laughter. Thus, the task force fleet completed its final checks, and refueling was finalized as well. Earlier, on November 21st, when the flagship Akagi anchored at Hitokapu Bay, Commander Yamamoto, currently in port at Hiroshima Bay, had received Daikairei No. 5 from Imperial Headquarters. The essential points were, Commander Yamamoto of the combined fleet shall deploy detachments that are necessary for execution of the operations plan to the standby area at sea in a timely manner. In the event challenged by the US, UK, or Dutch military during the conduct of operations, force may be used in self-defense. Based on this Daikairei, Yamamoto issued a telegram order with the following message to Nagumo on November 25th. The task force fleet shall move from Hitokapu Bay with maximum secrecy and advance to the standby point to complete expedited refueling on the evening of December 3rd. The standby position which Commander Yamamoto referred to was 800 miles to the north of the Hawaiian Islands. Thus, at 6 a.m. on November 26th, just before sunrise when the sky was still dark, the task force fleet, led by 3 submarines, floated with stealth under the cover of thick clouds into the rough seas of the North Pacific. There was nobody to see the fleet off except the coastal defense ship dispatched by the Ominato Defense Center. It sent us a signal which read, "Wish you success on your mission." Responding to the signal with, "Thanks," the Akagi passed close by the ship. A naval ensign was on top of the mast and was being whipped by the morning wind. I went up to the bridge where Commander Yoshishiro Miura was steering. The responsibility to bring this grand fleet to the starting point for the air squadrons was on his shoulders now. This chief navigation officer, who used to joke all the time, now had a sober face and held his mouth firmly clenched. I had another look to make sure it was the same person. Besides, he usually wore scuffed and worn-out slippers, but today he was wearing shoes. Next to Miura stood the ship's captain, Kichi Hasegawa. His face was free from any distracting thoughts, and he stared at the horizon through the front glass. Looking down the flight deck from the bridge, I could see that the crew members, standing in a line, were all looking at the passing sight of the homeland. However, who could have been aware at the time that the tragedy of these islands had already started, that these islands of Tsushima would be separated from and lost to the homeland as the price of defeat? On December 5th, local time, the task force fleet reached a point 700 nautical miles to the north of Hawaii, finally entering the patrol zone of the enemy PBY flying boats. Here the fleet received its final supply of fuel, then separated from the refueling tankers. To the departing fleet, a signal was sent from the flagship Akagi. "Appreciate all your supportive efforts. We pray for our good fortune in battle." To this, the commander of the supply fleet responded, "Wish you success." At 6:30 a.m. on December 6th, local time, Tokyo time 2 a.m. December 7th, the task force fleet gathered speed to 24 knots. The overwhelming sight of the fleet, ploughing the waves and churning up snow-white spray, was truly magnificent, and I was excited like a child despite my age. Turning my head to the east, I saw the sunrise. I prayed to no one in particular. I wish that for just one day today we will not be detected by anybody. If we can escape detection just one more day today, then we will be launched before sunrise tomorrow. At 10:30 a.m. we received a telegram from Combined Fleet. It was an instruction from Commander Yamamoto. The fate of Imperial Japan depends upon this one battle. Everyone must fulfill his duties with utmost dedication. This instruction from Commander Yamamoto was immediately passed to all crew members of the task force fleet. The Z flag was hoisted on top of the mast of every ship. For the first time since the Battle of the Sea of Japan 36 years ago, the Z flag fluttered in the Pacific Ocean. The flight deck of each of the 6 carriers was filled with airplanes with extended wings. The blackish surfaces of the torpedoes and bombs already mounted on the planes reflected an unearthly shine. At 5:25 p.m., we received a reconnaissance report from submarine I-72 of the Task Force Vanguard. The U.S. fleet is not at Lahaina. Lahaina anchorage on Maui Island was used for repair work by the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and the submarine confirmed that elements of the U.S. fleet were not anchored there. Before long, the evening darkness of December 6th came down on us. In the end, we were saved from being detected by enemy patrol planes, submarines, or even ships passing by. I convinced myself that our task force had all the luck on our side. I went to bed early as we were scheduled to launch at dawn the next morning. I thought that I might not be able to sleep well, but I had a peaceful dream. Under the existing conditions, Commander Nagumo made the following assessment the day before the air attack. 1. Enemy forces in the Hawaii area are 8 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, approximately 10 heavy cruisers, and approximately 6 light cruisers. All the aircraft carriers and heavy cruisers appear to be out to sea. The rest remain at Pearl Harbor. There is a high probability that the fleet at sea is engaged in practice in the southern area of Maui Island, and they are not anchored at Lahaina. 2. Unless there is any particular change in the situation tonight, we will concentrate the attack on Pearl Harbor. 3. While we have no indication that the enemy is at heightened vigilance, we should remain on high alert at all times. The sea was rough. The ocean waves were high, buffeting the ships which were running at full speed. Waves splashing at the bows appeared whitish in the pre-dawn darkness, and occasionally the splash bounced back on the flight deck. On the flight deck, planes ready for the attack were positioned in line with extended wings. Maintenance crews were working hard to protect the planes from the pitch of the ship, holding on to planes. The time was 5:30 a.m. December 7th. I put on my flight suit and went up to the operations room on the bridge. "Commander, we are ready to go now," I said, as I gave a salute of farewell to Commander Nagumo. The commander stood up from the sofa and grabbed my hand firmly, saying just one phrase, "I am counting on you." I went down the stairs leading Nagumo to the ready room for the air crews, where the Akagi's captain, Kichi Hasegawa, had also come down from the bridge. The lights in the ready room were dim. The narrow room could not accommodate many people, and some of the air crews overflowed into the passage. On the blackboard in the front side of the room, the present position of the Akagi was indicated as of 6 a.m., true north of Oahu Island, 230 nautical miles. I stood in front of the crew to give a command. "Attention!" Then I saluted Captain Hasegawa, who raised his voice quickly. "Commence in accordance with your orders." The air crews left the ready room and scattered towards their own planes. I left the room last of all and went up to the departure command center for just a short while. On the way, somebody tapped my shoulder, and I looked back to find Genda there. We looked at each other and grinned. That was all, but everything was understood. At the departure command center, the head of aviation, Masuda, was busy commanding the launching operation. He looked at me and asked, "Commander, it's pitching quite hard. I wonder if the night departure procedure is okay." As he said this, the sea was becoming rougher, and the pitch of the ship exceeded 10 degrees. The ship's bows were hitting the water so hard that the waves were thrown up to splash on the flight deck. The sky was black, and even the horizon could not be distinguished. If this had been a drill, it certainly would have been suspended until sunrise. But we were now at the final moment of a win-or-lose bet. How could we run away? I responded, "There is nothing to worry about. We just have to measure the timing of pitching to launch properly." Then the ensign in charge of launching said, "I think it will work if we release the wheel blocks one by one according to the pitching cycle." I was encouraged by his clever advice and tapped his shoulder, saying, "I trust you." "Well, I've got to go." I nodded to the people gathered in the departure command center and noticed that even the chief doctor, who rarely showed up in the center, was there to see us off. Hearing their voices of salute behind me, I approached my plane. My plane was marked especially for the general commander, with 3 red lines drawn on a yellow background covering the entire tail wing, and it was distinguishable even in darkness. Waiting for me at the side of the plane was a senior petty officer from the Air Squadron's maintenance group. Assisting me to board the plane, he handed over a hachimaki, white headband, saying, "This is a present from the maintenance crews with a wish that they would like to accompany you to Pearl Harbor themselves. Please put it on and go with our wishes." I nodded heartily and received the hachimaki, wearing it tightly on my aviation cap. "Start your engines." The command was issued by the command center, and engines started to rotate. The mothership headed towards the wind, turning her bow to the left. The wind was coming from the north. Along with the Z flag, the battle flag was hoisted now on top of the mast. Planes that had completed their trial runs long ago put on their flight light, one after another. The flight lights were quivering with the vibration of the propellers. "Take off!" From the command center, a green signal light was swung in a large circle. This was the order to commence launching. The planes started to take off from the forward area where the fighters were positioned. As soon as the sound of the engine became louder, the plane started to move. The pitch of the ship was still strong, and the flight deck was constantly dipping into the sea surface. People watching the departure held their breath. Then, at the next moment, the plane took off smoothly from the ship. Soon, the next plane followed and took off, and the next. There was a sudden outburst of banzai, and caps, handkerchiefs, and hands were shaken with great energy. Thus, the first wave of the combined fighters and bombers, 183 planes, took off from the 6 carriers, and they got into formations guided by the Aldis lamp on the commander's plane of each group. I was on the first plane spearheading the groups, and I made a long circle above the fleet to confirm the arrangement of the flying formation. The assembly of the first wave of the air attack squadron was completed in 15 minutes. I then turned the indicator needle to Oahu Island while flying above the flagship Akagi. It was 6:15 a.m., Tokyo time, 1:45 a.m., December 8th. I was full of enthusiasm and courage in the lead position, the first plane of the first wave, of the entire attacking force, shouldering the destiny of my beloved country. I thought at that moment that I was glad that I was born a man. I must somehow have anticipated this scene during my childhood, when I first wanted to be a soldier, and I was surely born to be a warrior of the Japanese Empire. Back in those days, I did not take it seriously when my father believed in the notion of being born under a lucky star, but now I understood that I was exactly the one who had been born under a good star. My past days of youth were indeed just for this one day. Okay, I will leave nothing undone in today's command of the battle. The flight formation of the First Wave Attack Squadron was spearheaded by my plane as General Commander, followed by 49 level bombers under my direct command, and 500 metres to the right, at a lower altitude by 200 metres, we were followed by 40 torpedo bombers led by Lieutenant Commander Murata. To the left, 500 metres apart and flying 200 metres higher, 51 dive bombers were led by Lieutenant Commander Takahashi. Finally, 43 Zero fighters led by Lieutenant Commander Itaya accompanied the formation groups providing reconnaissance and air support. Our flight altitude was 3,000 metres, and thick clouds hung below us. Our flight speed was 125 knots, and it would be 1.5 hours more of flying above the clouds to Oahu. It was 6:30 in the morning, and the sun was rising. Below us there was the vast expanse of a sea of clouds, all in white, looking like someone had spread floss all over. As soon as the eastern sky started to turn to a cobalt colour, a huge immense sun peeped through the clouds. It was a burning crimson ball. Then the brilliant rays of the sun shone all over. It looked exactly as if our naval flag filled the entire sky. I took this to mean the dawn of Japan. At the sight of the rising sun, I unconsciously uttered, "Glorious dawn." I said this in English. Back then, English was rejected as a hostile language, but I studied English privately in the belief that if we had to fight with the United States, the language would be needed. That was why the English came out at that moment. There was a considerable tailwind from the north, which made me think arrival time to Oahu would be shorter than originally scheduled. However, since we were flying above the clouds, the sea surface was not visible. Under these conditions, we could not use dead reckoning navigation to measure our drift. While useful devices like radar were not yet installed, the General Commander's plane alone was equipped with a radio direction finder called Cruci, imported from the US and made by Fairchild Company Limited. I did not put much faith in this equipment, taking the connotation of the name Cruci, which sounds like kurushi, meaning hardship or suffering, as a joke and to be used only in case of trouble. Now we were somewhat in trouble, and I thought we could try the equipment. Putting the receivers on my ears, I switched it on, turned the dial, and swinging jazz music came through loud and clear. No doubt the radio signal was from a Honolulu broadcasting station. Then I measured the direction with the frame-type antenna. "Lieutenant Matsuzaki," I called the pilot, Mitsuo Matsuzaki, through the plane's voice pipe. The General Commander's plane had 3 seats. The experienced Matsuzaki was seated in the pilot's seat. I sat in the middle reconnaissance seat to take command of the entire force along with navigation duties. In the rear seat, the expert telegrapher, Senior Chief Petty Flight Officer Tokunobu Mizuki, was responsible for radio communications. "Yes, sir," responded Matsuzaki. "We caught the radio broadcast from Honolulu. From this point on we will use radio navigation. Is the Cruci's indicator in your seat working?" "Yes, the needle indicates 5 degrees to the left." "You're right. Maintain the course on the needle." "I understand, sir." The pilot adjusted the course, and the plane descended a bit. Then, fixing the needle as suggested by the Cruci, Matsuzaki reported, "All set, sir." This undoubtedly put the plane on the course to Honolulu. I breathed a sigh of relief, but thinking that if Oahu was covered with clouds, it would be a bit troublesome. Unintentionally, I turned the dial trying to adjust the sensitivity of my Cruci, and then the Honolulu broadcast began announcing the morning weather forecast. Of course it was in English, and it was occasionally repeated slowly. I made a quick note with a pencil on the memo pad. Amazingly, it was an aviation weather report that was translated as, The weather on Oahu Island is partially clear, with clouds covering the mountains. The cloud's altitude is 3,500 feet, about 1,000 meters, but with good visibility and a north wind at 10 knots. "We've got it!" I shouted in spite of myself. If things had been prearranged, the most needed information would not have come at a more perfect time. As I thought earlier, I was lucky, and I was grateful. There was no mistaking that success was at hand. With the knowledge of the weather at our destination, I felt totally relieved. What pleased me most of all was the fact that the clouds in the sky above Oahu were broken. The time was 7:30 a.m., 1 hour and 30 minutes from takeoff. We should have been close to reaching Oahu, but the island's shape refused to come into sight, still shrouded in the midst of seemingly endless clouds. I was becoming somewhat irritated. As I happened to look down, I thought, how strange. My understanding was that Oahu was mountainous, but suddenly, through the wisp of clouds, I could see a stretched white line at the water's edge. "Matsuzaki, look down! That's the coastline!" "Yes, sir, it's the coastline." I quickly checked the air map. This was the north edge of Oahu Island, Kahuku Point. "Matsuzaki, we are above Kahuku Point. Now, change the course to the right to go around to the west side of the island, along the beach." "Yes, sir. I am changing the course to the right." The Commander General's plane made a wide bank, changing the course to the right decisively. During our course change, I could clearly see the formation groups that followed the General Commander's plane. I opened the windshield to stand up. Lieutenant Kentaro Iwai, second element leader of the 1st Squadron of the Akagi's level bombers, was positioned closest to us and waved his hand to salute. Every silver wing in the sky was shining with the reflection of the morning sunlight. I patiently counted each one of them. All 183 planes of the 1st Wave Air Attack Squadron were confirmed, and not a single plane had fallen out. Then the moment to give the command for deployment came. Deployment means shifting from a flight formation to a standby formation for attack. While the groups took concerted action during flight formation, once entering the attack formation, each squadron had its own directives to carry out. On the command of deployment, the Torpedo bombing squadron would lower its altitude to prepare to launch their torpedoes. The dive bombing squadron would take position on the upwind side to take advantage of the tailwind in their approach, and in contrast, the level bombing squadron would take position on the leeward side as they would enter the target area against the wind. And the General Commander was supposed to make the decision whether it would be a surprise attack as scheduled, or whether it might end up as a contested assault, with signalling instructions given accordingly. If a surprise attack is possible, the Torpedo bombing squadron is given the first order of attack. Before enemy anti-aircraft fire begins, the Torpedo bombing squadron will intrude deep into the enemy defense at ultra-low altitude and will spearhead the attack. On the other hand, in the event of a contested assault, the first order of the attack is given to the bombing squadron with the aim of bombing and destroying the enemy's grounded planes and anti-aircraft guns, then to have the torpedo bombers penetrate enemy defences while the enemy is regrouping. However, whether we could follow our plan of a surprise attack or not depended totally on the enemy's response, not on our wishful thinking. "Matsuzaki, carefully watch the sky above Oahu. Enemy fighters might approach." Immediately, I myself carefully scanned the skies above, straining my eyes. If scattered dots as small as pinheads should appear in the distance, they would soon become bigger, like flies, then like small birds, and finally, we would see the arrival of enemy attack fighters. I had had enough experience of this in China, and I kept a careful watch so that I would not miss a single pinhead. Gradually, the clouds became thinner with more breaks. However, the land was still not in sight except for the beach line. Our position was already considerably to the west. We might have to delay the opportunity to launch our surprise attack if we did not deploy any time soon now. "Matsuzaki, it seems we can go with the surprise attack." "Yes, I also think it's a surprise attack." "Good. I am giving the order for deployment. Maintain this altitude, turn to the south and stay along the west side of the island." "Yes, sir." Then I opened the windshield and shot a flare downward with my signal pistol. The signal flare flowed, dragging a tail of black smoke. One flare was the command of deployment for the launch of the surprise attack. The time was 7:40 a.m. Having completed giving the order for deployment, I was watching the movements of each group. The torpedo bombing squadron was lowering its altitude. Meanwhile, the air superiority squadron that was supposed to increase speed to take the lead position did not move into action. I guessed that it must have been because they missed seeing the signal due to clouds that blocked their visibility. Then I released another signal flare towards the air superiority squadron. This time, the air superiority squadron immediately understood, gathered speed and advanced towards the sky above Oahu. However, this caused an unintended error. Seeing the second signal, the commander of the dive bombing squadron, Lieutenant Commander Takahashi, misinterpreted it as a two-flare signal. Two flares were the signal for the command of a no-surprise assault, meaning that the dive bombers should take the lead in the attack. Consequently, both the dive bombing and the torpedo bombing squadrons found themselves spearheading the attack. But this resulted in a simultaneous attack, a sort of unexpected success born out of a failure. From the voice tube I heard Matsuzaki say, "Commander, the glass is clouded and I can't see well, so I will open the windshield." "Okay," I responded, and Matsuzaki opened the windshield over his seat. Then a gust of wind blew in, and something white, rubbing the windshield, flew away. Wondering what it was, I looked as it floated away from the plane. It was a muffler that Matsuzaki had been wearing around his neck. As this had sentimental value for Matsuzaki, I felt sorry for his loss and watched the falling muffler. Then, beyond the disappearing muffler, Pearl Harbor came into sight across the Oahu plain. "Commander, I see Pearl Harbor," Matsuzaki reported to me, gasping. "I see it myself. Lieutenant, turn the needle to the south to bring the plane to Barber's Point." Having given the instruction, I took the binoculars and gazed at Pearl Harbor. "They're here, they're here." Battleships with tripod masts and cage masts. 1, 2, 3. I followed with my eyes and counted in my mind. As expected, the full set of 8 battleships was at anchor. I felt my temperature rise as I thought, "Thank goodness they're here." I glanced at my watch. It was 12 minutes to 8 o'clock. If I issued the order to attack now, the first bomb would be dropped exactly at 8 a.m. The air raid on Pearl Harbor was scheduled to commence at 8 a.m. I looked back at the telegrapher. "Chief Petty Officer Mizuki, send the message to all planes. All forces attack." Mizuki clicked the telegraphic key. It was the repeated transmission of a simple abbreviation. "2-2-2. Commander, transmission of the attack message has been completed." "Yosh, good." The time was 7:49 a.m., December 7th, 1941. In Tokyo, it was 3:19 in the morning, December 8th. As I look back, that moment signaled the raising of the curtain on the cursed Pacific War. After having given the command to attack, I turned around Barber's Point, guiding the level bombing squadron under my direct control, trying to measure the timing to commence the attack. We could see the air base at Barber's Point to our left, but there was not a single plane there. I turned my eyes to Pearl Harbor. The area was still covered thinly with the morning mist. It was a quiet sight, and it might just have been me, but Pearl Harbor appeared to be asleep still. There was no sign of an airfight happening in the sky above. There were no flashes of anti-aircraft fire coming from the ground. The surprise attack seemed to have succeeded. I thought, as I have brought matters this far, even before seeing the end result, I have confidence in the skill of the air squadrons that they will achieve success. I thought that it would be better to hasten the report. Not only Admiral Yamamoto himself, but also Imperial Headquarters and all Navy and Army troops in the Western Pacific Ocean were waiting anxiously to hear about the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. I looked back at the telegrapher. "Mizuki, send the message by co-type radio wave. We have succeeded with our surprise attack." "Yes, sir." As if having waited for this moment impatiently, the Chief Petty Officer immediately clicked the key. It was a repeated transmission of Tora Tora Tora. Commander, Akagi has understood the transmission of Tora Tora Tora. Good. It was 7:53 a.m., 4 minutes after giving the order to all forces to attack. Later, I learned that this message had been received directly by both Imperial headquarters in Tokyo, as well as the Nagato anchored in Hiroshima Bay, before the message had been relayed by the Akagi. In those days, we could not expect to deliver a message a distance of 3,000 nautical miles, with the limited power of a small telegraphic instrument mounted on a plane. Referring to an old folk tale, they said that probably a tiger that travelled 1,000 miles came back the same 1,000 miles. Thus, without losing time, Tora 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 was broadcast to Taiwan, French Indochina, Malaya, Borneo, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Guam, and Wake Island. And the Imperial Army divisions stationed across Asia, which had been holding their collective breath to hear the outcome of our air raid, went into their respective planned combat actions. I was relieved to have reported Tora 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 myself, but it was yet to be proved if the surprise attack would really succeed and annihilate the US Pacific Fleet. I stood up on the seat with the binoculars in my hands and started to give out combat orders, paying attention to the surrounding battle conditions. As soon as we saw black smoke coming up from Hickam Airfield, smoke came up from Ford Island as well. Soon after, I saw columns of water rising one after another where the battleships were berthed. The battle was developing in our favour. The 51 planes of the dive-bombing squadron, led by Lieutenant Commander Takahashi, split up into two groups. The Shokaku group, under his direct control, headed for the bases at Hickam and Ford Island, and the Zuikaku group, led by Lieutenant Akira Sakamoto, headed to Wheeler Base. When Takahashi looked down, he saw huge hangars lining the airfield, and on the apron heavy bombers were parked side by side. He salivated. Then he banked his plane, entered his dive, and dropped a bomb. Soon after, the second plane followed, then the third and the fourth. Because of Takahashi's misunderstanding that he should spearhead the attack, it was 7:55 when the first bomb was dropped on Hickam Field, 5 minutes earlier than planned. It was also 7:55 when the group led by Sakamoto dropped their bombs on Wheeler Base. On the airfield, as many as 100 fighters were parked on the apron in front of the hangar, all neatly lined up. Recognizing this situation, Sakamoto's planes attacked from the leeward and not the windward side in order to prevent the ensuing black smoke from screening the targets for the following planes. This showed admirable calm and appropriate behaviour. Thus, at the inception of the attack, most of the enemy fighters were prevented from leaving the ground. Meanwhile, Murata, who had seen the dive-bombing squadron hit the airfields, rushed to his targets before they were obscured by the black smoke. And at 7:57, the torpedo launched by Murata hit the battleship West Virginia and raised the first water column of our attack. The number of water columns increased in succession as the torpedo bombers flew in. I was satisfied as I observed the battle scenes. In any event, there was no time to order corrections. It was now time for the level bombing squadron under my direct control, and I guided them towards Pearl Harbor. Our targets were the battleships moored on the east side of Ford Island. Chief Petty Officer Mizuki, send the TSU repeat order to the level bombing squadron. This was the attack order specifically meant for the level bombing squadron. A 2-repeat order was for the entire attack force. Our communications abbreviations were kept very simple, as simplicity is a fundamental principle of war strategy. The level bombing squadron broke into 10 groups of 5 planes each, forming a line astern. The planes kept a distance of 200 meters in order to avoid the turbulence of the fart, meaning the air current created by the forward plane. This resulted in an extremely long line of planes. They were on a bombing course from the southwest to the northeast. Our bombing altitude was 3,000 meters. Commander, I will position the bombing guide plane to the front. Yosh! Okay! The bombing guide plane was currently following the lead plane. The pilot was Chief Petty Flight Officer Shoichi Watanabe, and the bombardier was Chief Petty Flight Officer Yanosuke ASO, an excellent combination, always having achieved outstanding performance in the fleet's bombing drills. Matsuzaki sent a quick signal, to which Watanabe nodded. The first plane increased its altitude slightly. The second plane advanced forward to take the lead position, and then the first plane decreased its altitude and took the position previously held by the second plane. Thus, under the lead of the bombing guide plane, the planes entered their bombing course. Looking like the famous bearded, wide-eyed Buddhist monk from India, Bodhidharma, ASO could be seen through the windshield. As our eyes met, he saluted, smiling. I raised my hand, signalling, "Do your best." Then he nodded, "You can depend on us." The targets for the level bombing squadron under my direct control were the battleships anchored at the mooring posts on the eastern side of Ford Island, and it was decided for each bombing sub-squadron to select the targets in the order that they appeared from the north. Therefore, the target for the first bombing sub-squadron, which included my plane, was the battleship Nevada. As expected, the enemy anti-aircraft fire flashed when we approached the entrance to Pearl Harbor. Based on the fact that they launched a counterattack 5 minutes after the start of our attack, I saw that they had been well prepared for battle. Enemy anti-aircraft fire concentrated on my sub-squadron group as we spearheaded the level bombing attack. Through effective firing adjustments, the enemy barrage approached steadily, but we could not afford to deviate from our planned bombing course. Black smoke from bursting shells flowed around the plane. It was not comfortable. The altitude was only 3,000 meters. I thought we would be hit. Ducking my head, I tried not to look, but then the explosion from a shell made me feel itchy around my buttocks. In an instant, the bullet hole became big enough to see the sky through the opening. With a banging sound, the plane was severely rocked. Matsuzaki asked me, "Commander, where were we hit?" While I was going to check the damage myself, Mizuki responded, "A shell splinter hit the left rear of our fuselage and has ripped open a hole. The control cable was cut, and it's supported only by a single strand. I cannot reach it to fix it." I felt very uneasy, but we were in the midst of battle. It was no time to feel uneasy. "Matsuzaki, the control cable is almost cut. Don't make any sudden moves." "Yes, I got it. So far, no problem. We're in control." "Good." Before long, we approached the targets. The course adjustment by the guiding plane became even more precise. As everything would depend on the timing, I focused my full attention on the guiding plane's bomb, holding the dropping gear. At the moment the lead plane released its bomb, those of us in the following 4 planes would drop our bombs altogether. However, the guiding plane banked a bit, meaning that we would have to repeat our approach. I felt discouraged as we would have to go through the barrage of anti-aircraft fire again. What I learned later from ASO was that when they were very close to the point of releasing their bomb, he made a misalignment due to a disturbance by a small cloud. No one in our attack squadron would drop a bomb which was brought all the way to the sky above Pearl Harbor, knowing that it would not hit its target. There was even a squadron group that repeated their approach 3 times until they were able to make a perfect alignment for their attack. Thus, my first bombing squadron group made a big turn around to the right to repeat our attack approach. In the meantime, the second group that followed had started the level bombing attack. It was 8:04 a.m. when they dropped their bombs. Then, when my first group was beginning the bombing run again, we saw a huge explosion among the battleships on the eastern side of Ford Island. Roaring flames and dark smoke flared high, rising up to 500 meters. I intuitively judged it as an induced explosion. Soon the shock waves reached our formation, even though we were quite far away. The plane shook. Lieutenant Matsuzaki, who was at the controls, raised his head in surprise. I advised him, "Matsuzaki, the enemy ship's magazine seems to have exploded." Matsuzaki opened the windshield, and when he looked at the sight, the words that came out of his mouth were, "Bakayaro, Zamamiri, you fools, serves you right." This ship that exploded and sank in an instant was the battleship Arizona. 2 800-kilogram armor-piercing bombs dropped by the second bombing group from the Kaga hit the ship, and the instant the second bomb hit the side of the Arizona's second turret, a huge explosion went off. This was confirmed by the commander of the Kaga's second squadron, Lieutenant Hideo Maki. Presumably the bomb that hit the turret pierced through the armoured deck, hurtled into the forward magazine, and triggered the explosion. The battle was at its full height. Black smoke filled the entire airspace over the battle area. With my binoculars, I performed close surveillance of the battleships. The Nevada at the north end was burning, but there was an indication that the ship was going to move. The ship that had exploded, the Arizona, was second from the north. Both the West Virginia, third on the outside, and the Tennessee, berthed on the inside, were enveloped by fierce flames. The fourth on the outside, the Oklahoma, had already capsized. The Maryland on the inside somehow still seemed to be in good condition, so I decided to target that ship. I sent a hand signal to the guiding plane. "Aim at the Maryland, the fourth ship on the inside." Chief Petty Officer Abe nodded. My first squadron group was on the bombing course again. Suddenly we were attacked by a barrage of anti-aircraft fire that was even fiercer than the previous ones. Boom! We felt a shock. The third plane in our formation seemed to take a hit from a shell fragment. The wires holding its bomb harness were cut, and the bomb was falling. I was relieved as it was a near hit, but it was useless to have a plane without bombs stay with the formation. I sent a hand signal to the third plane. "Leave the line and go back alone." Then I looked down to see the ripples on the water made by the bomb. There was a minesweeper-like ship nearby. At least the bomb had an effect and surprised the ship. I looked more closely and realized that it was a gate net. And now, because the bomb had exploded, the gate net was being closed. Suddenly, I remembered the special mini-submarines which must have crept into Pearl Harbor overnight. Before the mission, I asked Fleet Commander Yamamoto to issue an order that the submarines should not start the attack under any circumstances, even if it appeared that there was an unexpected, ideal opportunity, because we had to secure the success of a surprise attack by our air squadrons. However, as I now saw, there was no hope for the mini-submarines to escape. I shouted from the bottom of my heart to the mini-submarines which might be submerged patiently at the bottom of Pearl Harbor at that moment. "Thanks, my fellow warriors. We will fight a good fight for you." Since I had ordered the third plane to return, my attack group now consisted of 4 planes. We focused once again on the target, the Maryland, and the signal from the guide plane indicated, "Ready for release." Breathless, gripping the bomb release, I waited for the moment to arrive. "Bombs away!" I pulled the bomb release, watched the bomb glide gently downward. Then I lay on the seat to watch the descent of the falling bomb from the lower window. 4 armor-piercing bombs were going down side by side. There is nothing so thrilling in the world than to see whether the bomb you have just dropped will hit its target. Before long, directly in front of the bombs, which were moving in a straight line, the Maryland came closer. The bombs became smaller and smaller to the point that we would lose sight of them if we blinked. I stared, holding my breath. I felt a spine-tingling thrill. As soon as the bombs became pinheads, 2 white puffs of smoke shot up from the deck of the Maryland. "2 bombs have hit!" Since delayed fuses were installed in our armor-piercing bombs, they emitted white smoke when they hit the upper deck. At this point in time, just as the first wave attack was almost ending, the second wave squadron of 167 planes, led by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki, was joining the battle. While I had the first wave squadrons return to their motherships, my plane alone from the first wave remained in the sky above Pearl Harbor. My role was to provide battle instructions to the second wave squadrons, as well as to provide surveillance of our achievements in battle. Shimazaki reached Kahuku Point at 8:40 a.m. and gave the command for deployment. At 8:54, he gave the command to attack. Upon this command of attack, 78 dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Igusa, rushed to join forces from the east of Pearl Harbor. At that time, Pearl Harbor was covered with black smoke, and this hindered our visibility. Fearless Igusa started to dive against the funnel of concentrated anti-aircraft barrages shooting up through the black smoke. As he came down through the smoke, he could clearly see the ship which was firing at him, and then he bombed it. There is a proverb that says, "The pheasant would not be shot but for its cries." If the enemy ships had not been shooting at him, it would have meant that those silent ships were already damaged. Igusa's method under fire was to aim at undamaged ones. It worked perfectly and did not duplicate the first wave attack. while the main force of the level bombing squadron, 54 planes under Shimazaki's direct command, attacked Hickam Airfield. Some of them attacked hangars on Ford Island and Kaneohe. The bombing altitude was 1,500 meters and under the clouds. It was a miracle that not a single plane was lost flying at this low altitude and enduring such fierce anti-aircraft fire. Nevertheless, close to half, more than 20 planes, were hit and needed repairs, leaving them unusable for repeat attacks. The first wave of the Air Superiority Squadron, led by Lieutenant Commander Itaya, secured control of the sky above Oahu. Then, the second wave of 35 planes, led by Lieutenant Saburo Shindo, moved to strafe each airbase and achieve more of our battle objectives. The first point of my role as General Commander was to give proper battle instructions in order to avoid having our forces attack the same targets twice. Without battle commands, the squadrons would be tempted to concentrate on the same targets, leaving some untouched. Therefore, I instructed them to exert maximum battle performance by directing the attack all around with equal attention. The second point was to make an accurate surveillance of our battle achievements. If reported battle achievements were based on incorrect surveillance, the result could be misjudgments of the enemy's capabilities in battles to follow. The first and second waves were finished. I stayed alone in the sky above Pearl Harbor for 3 hours in the lead plane, exhausting all my energies giving battle instructions and conducting surveillance of the post-battle situation. In terms of my surveillance, the achievements of our attack could not be easily discerned due to time constraints. Except for the sunken Arizona and capsized Oklahoma, I could not tell whether the other ships were sunk or not, while they were certainly burning. Here the shallow waters were merely 12 meters deep. If a battleship with a 7-meter draft should sink, it will descend only 5 meters before it reaches the bottom of the sea, not any further. Seeing Pearl Harbor from above, it was just like pouring water in a frog's face. Next, we focused on confirming the battle results concerning the destruction of the enemy's air power. I looked around each airbase. Every one of them was engulfed in billowing black smoke, but I knew perfectly well that a gasoline fire exaggerates the burned landscape, so that the impression is of total destruction. As I looked carefully trying not to be deceived, I failed to reach any hard conclusions. However, I judged that we had destroyed the enemy's entire air capability based on the fact that not a single enemy plane dared to intercept us above Pearl Harbor for as long as 3 hours. As the battle had tentatively come to an end, I decided to return to the mothership. The flight range of our Type 97 carrier attack bomber was 5 hours, and we had already flown 4½ hours. By simple calculation, we would not make it to the mothership in another 30 minutes. But we were at war, and I felt somehow that we would return safely. It was 10:30 a.m. I said, "Matsuzaki, we will head back. Take the return course of 10 degrees." And I was still searching for possible targets during our return. We had to hit surviving cruisers and auxiliary ships like destroyers and submarines. But above all else, I felt that it was essential to smash as many oil tanks and shipyard repair facilities as possible. As we were about to leave Oahu, a fighter approached us with a friendly sign, banked and followed us. I asked, "Whose plane is that?" As I looked back, Mizuki, who must have been looking at it for a while, responded, "It belongs to Zuikaku." If it was a fighter from the Zuikaku, it belonged to the first attack wave. What a long time the plane has been flying, I thought. Then I thought that it was possible that there were other stray fighters around. "Matsuzaki, we'll make one more round to pick up stray kids." It was clear that Matsuzaki was worried about how much fuel we had left for our return, but he could not ignore an order from his commander. That day, the gathering point for returning to pick up stray air fighters was Kahuku Point. The general commander's plane rounded the point and found, as suspected, another stray fighter. I successfully returned to the mothership, leading these 2 fighters. However, the senior petty officer of maintenance told me, "Commander, you had no fuel left. It was a big risk that you did not return earlier. Besides, it was dangerous because the control wire was almost completely severed." I responded, "We are at war. It will fly even if the control wire is cut. The maintenance crews listening to the conversation must have thought that the general commander was insane. They were right. I was, in fact, a crazy officer with a burning desire to serve my country. As we touched down on the Akagi, the air crews waiting impatiently for my return rushed to welcome me. I was putting together the report of the battle results in the Launch Command Center witnessed by my commanders, including Lieutenant Commander Murata of the Torpedo Bombing Squadron, Lieutenant Commander Itaya and Lieutenant Shindo of the Air Superiority Squadrons, Lieutenant Furukawa of the Level Bombing Squadron and Lieutenant Chihaya of the Dive Bombing Squadron, when there was an urgent and impatient request from the bridge. "Commander Fuchida, come to the bridge quickly." I went up to the bridge as I had no choice, leaving the report of the battle results until later. As soon as he saw me, Commander Nagumo abruptly and eagerly asked me, "How did the battle go?" These were the points that I was just now analysing with my officers. Under the situation, I was able to report only what I myself had seen. "Yes, sir. It is certain that 4 enemy battleships were sunk. The remaining 4 ships were badly damaged. I believe that they will not be able to mobilize from Pearl Harbor for the time being. I think we have annihilated the enemy's air power. In addition, each airbase was blanketed with fierce black smoke that interfered with my surveillance of the battle area. But due to the fact that not a single enemy plane showed up to counterattack us during my 3 hours in the air, I believe that air superiority belongs to us. The enemy anti-aircraft fire reacted much more quickly than expected, beginning less than 5 minutes after the start of our attack. I believe that they were prepared for war." Nagumo, who was nodding keenly as I reported, expressed his appreciation when I finished. "Commander, well done." He looked at Chief of Staff Kusaka to inquire if he had anything else he wanted to ask me, to which the Chief of Staff winked at me with a gesture indicating that I should retire and relax. I saluted and returned to the Launch Command Center. On the flight deck, preparations were taking place for a second repeat attack. The planes that had refueled and replenished their ammunition were lifted to the deck by elevator and were lined up at their takeoff positions. I was standing by for the next attack, eating a rice dumpling with bean paste, our standard battle food. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commander of the 2nd Aviation Fleet, sent a signal from his flagship, the Soryu, to the Akagi. "Soryu and Hiryu are ready for takeoff." This was implicitly a demand to expedite the start of the second attack. The Akagi herself was nearing completion of the work required for her planes to take off. Then a course signal was raised on the Akagi's mast. The signal indicated that we would return on the route we had just followed. I was upset and thought, what stupidity! But the decision belonged to the commander. It would not do any good if I complained. However, it was Kusaka's principle that lions retreat once they have accomplished their attack. It was well known that Kusaka had immersed himself in studies of Zen Buddhism. We teased him about the Zen of self-deception, but he was serious about it. He was so serious that he adopted the lion story as his guiding principle. According to the story, the lion, once having given a full-force blow to its enemy, quickly turns to the next enemy, without any further thought or consideration, and takes a ready-to-pounce position to attack the next target with all its might. This is the principle behind lions retreat once they have accomplished their attack. Later, after the attack, Kusaka said that, "We have now accomplished the purpose of our operation by attacking Pearl Harbor and annihilating the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Any further attempt to attack oil tanks or repair facilities at the naval shipyard is nothing but the hindsight of fools." The situational judgment of Commander Nagumo to abandon a second-wave attack on Pearl Harbor and, instead, to take the return course of action was as follows. 1. By the first air attack, the original aim has been mostly accomplished. We can hardly expect significant increases in battle achievements if we dare to initiate the second air attack. 2. Even in the first air attack, the enemy defensive fire started quickly, nearly resulting in a no-surprise assault. The second and following air attack will become a pure assault with significant increase in casualties, in proportion to the additional expected battle achievements. 3. Judging from the enemy's communications, it is certain that there remain at least 50 large enemy planes. Besides, location and condition of the enemy aircraft carriers, heavy cruisers, submarines, and others are not known. 4. On the other hand, in view of the situation in which search beyond 250 nautical miles is difficult for us, as such search is dependent exclusively on the surveillance by advance groups of submarines, it is disadvantageous to stay so far from our bases in the enemy flight zone. On the basis of the above situational judgment, the task force fleet decided to disengage without making a repeat attack. I was totally against this judgment. The essence of military action is momentum. I thought that this was the exact time to exploit our battle advantage. I could not do anything if the commander decided to return because he was satisfied with the battle results, but if we are returning anyway, why should we take the same course back? I recommended to the commander that we take the central course, straight instead, as this might give us an opportunity to encounter 2 enemy aircraft carriers at sea. However, Commander Nagumo did not have much faith in our search capability. This was certainly one of our mistakes. Back in those days, the heads of Japanese naval aviation downgraded the role and usefulness of surveillance, instead placing importance on attack capabilities. They simply thought that any plane able to fly would be suitable for surveillance as well, and surveillance was regarded as routine practice for any aviator. However, at the outbreak of the Pacific War, this defective reasoning was clearly exposed. Surveillance requires even more skill and is more difficult than fighting, and unless special-purpose reconnaissance planes are developed and special training provided, reconnaissance crews with the required capabilities can never be developed. Unfortunately, at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, we were still at the stage where surveillance was not given high priority, and we failed to win the full trust of the commander. And the result was that, instead of the central course, we took the same northerly route to return. On December 23, 1941, hereafter Tokyo time, the Nagumo Task Force fleet returned to Japanese waters. As we entered Bungo Strait, each carrier's squadron landed at the bases where they trained before the mission. I flew to Kagoshima base, leading the level bombing and torpedo bombing squadrons of the Akagi. As I stepped down from the commander's plane, a junior high student ran up to me. Then he took out a piece of paper and started reading out loud. It was something like a resolution of appreciation. He was the representative of a commercial school near Kagoshima Airfield, and I noticed many students from the school, even students from a nearby girls' school, lining up near the apron to welcome us. I was surprised as I thought, who on earth could have known that we were the squadrons responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor? That should have been a top secret. However, the citizens of Kagoshima City had been watching our extended acrobatic practice before the mission. If our preparation had taken place today, there would have been a number of noise pollution lawsuits, with the big complaints arguing that the loud noise was preventing patients from being cured and stopping chickens from laying eggs. And even back then there was criticism. What the hell are they doing? Recently, naval aviation squadrons are neglecting all military rules. At the wharf during training, the planes buzzed the rooftops while engaged in simulated torpedo launching at low altitudes of 10 meters, aiming at a target in shallow water 500 meters away. It appeared to be sheer madness. Therefore, when they heard the news of the great victory of the Battle of Hawaii, every citizen of Kagoshima guessed our squadrons were involved. That night, among those of us who had returned to Kagoshima base, the governor of Kagoshima Prefecture invited the officers to a celebration party, and the mayor of Kagoshima City invited petty officers and sailors to a separate party. While we were drinking that night at a Japanese restaurant called Aoyagi, there was a call from the base with a message ordering Commander Fuchida and Lieutenant Commander Murata to return to the mothership, where we were to receive Admiral Yamamoto of the Combined Fleet and the Chief of the General Staff Nagano and others who would visit the Akagi. The message said that if we flew early in the morning from Kagoshima to Iwakuni, they would arrange for a motorboat to pick us up at the Iwakuni base pier. "Busan, they sent a troubling message," I said to Murata. He replied, "We have no choice. I will fly the plane, and the general commander can sleep in the rear seat." And so it was that the two of us, suffering from hangovers, flew from Kagoshima to the base at Iwakuni and returned to the Akagi aboard the waiting motorboat. The time was already past 11 o'clock in the morning. Yamamoto, Nagano, and the head of the aviation division, Eikichi Katagiri, were already present and about to propose a toast in the officers' mess following a speech by Yamamoto to the commanders of each of the task force fleet's units and a greeting by Nagano. As we arrived, Murata and I were pulled to the front, where Yamamoto and Nagano greeted us with words of appreciation, followed by another round of toasts, accompanied by chestnuts and squid. On this occasion, Admiral Yamamoto gave me a piece of calligraphy that he had prepared with his writing brush, and he commented that it represented his state of mind regarding the moment. The writing flowed beautifully and read, "The thunderous radio broadcast of the attack, from the sky of Hawaii, 3,000 nautical miles away. December 8, 1941. The brilliant action of Commander Fuchida, Isoroku Yamamoto." Afterwards, Nagano issued an order. On December 26th, Commander Fuchida, leader of the first wave air attack, and Lieutenant Commander Shimazaki, commander of the second wave attack, are to report directly to the throne, to His Majesty the Generalissimo, on the battle developments of Pearl Harbor. A report to the throne by officers of commander rank was unprecedented. This was an honor beyond anything that I deserved, and I consulted Genda on how to prepare for the presentation. It was decided that I would report on our attack on the ships and Shimazaki on the attack on the air bases, and we would organize our presentations accordingly. I asked Murata to draw a layout of the attack on the ships, and asked Chief Navigation Officer Miura to have his signalmen make a good quality copy. The signalmen, wearing white gloves as it would be honored by the Emperor's inspection, produced a fine copy. On December 25th, both Shimazaki and I flew from Kure Aviation Base to Yokosuka Base on a carrier bomber. When we arrived, we were received by Captain Kaizo Ueno, commander of the Yokosuka Air Squadrons, and it was only this officer who criticized the battle achievements. His point of criticism was it was not good to have left the enemy aircraft carriers unattacked and intact. Now, here was a real naval aviation pro. I quite agreed with him. On December 26th, Shimazaki and I reported to the General Staff Headquarters at 9 a.m., and after a rehearsal at the 1st Operations Department, went to the palace together with Nagano and Commander Nagumo. We waited for only a short time, and His Majesty appeared, accompanied only by his chief aide-de-camp, Shigeru Hasunuma. Standing directly across from His Majesty, I unfolded the layout in front of him, and pointing with my finger at the relevant places on the battlefield diagram, gave a blow-by-blow description of our battle achievements against the enemy ships. For each topic of discussion, I showed and described to him aerial photographs we had taken. His Majesty looked at the photos with great interest, turning them vertically and horizontally. Our allotted time was 30 minutes, but we ended up spending 1.5 hours. Following me, Shimazaki reported on the battle development and achievements of the attack on the air bases. When Nagano asked, "Are there any more questions?" the Emperor responded, "Not particularly." However, after a short while, he asked Nagano, "Are you bringing these photographs back?" Nagano relied, "We will have them framed and delivered to place by your side." The Emperor said, "The mounting can be done later. I will take them now to show them to the Empress." Thus, the Emperor himself left the room carrying more than a dozen photos. Upon our return from the palace, we were received at the official residence of the Minister of the Navy, where more than a dozen military councillors and leading dignitaries of the Navy were present. There, Shimazaki and I repeated exactly what we reported to the throne just a short time earlier. Prince Fushimi-nomiya was among the dignitaries, but it was the eldest person in the audience, Admiral Nobumasa Suetsugu, who, more than the others, praised us. The reason was that we had destroyed all the capital ships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.